Chazar starts by the second mission on the page of Chesam Aleph. Ein Bain, we're in the Ein Bain series. Ein Bain Nedarim L'Nedavos. There is no difference between a carbon that's a neder or a carbon that's a nedava, ella, except that Shenedarim Chai V'Achar Yusan. When Nedavos Ein Chai V'Achar Yusan. When a carbon is a neder, and the Gemara is going to explain to us the difference between a neder and a nedava. When a carbon is a neder, then the person is chayav to replace it if it gets lost or damaged. And if it's a nedava, the person is not chayav to replace it.
Meaning as a personal guarantor.
Right. He himself doesn't have to replace it if it says if it's a nedava. Zok the Gemara, hold the Inyan Balta Acher. But the Inyan Balta Acher, which is the lav, it's the avera of by a neder. It's an avera that when it says when you bring a neder to Hashem, lo ta'achal l'shamay, don't postpone bringing it. You have to bring it right away. And it actually says it in the Torah. It only says it for a neder. But the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah learns it from a Kal V'Chomer that from Gzer Shava. The Gemara learns it that it also applies by a nedava. So the Gemara says, so for Bal Ta'achar, for postponing bringing the carbon, for being over a lav of postponing of not bringing it right away, they're both equal, right? So the difference is the achrayis, but not the Bal Ta'achar. Tanan Hasam, right? Because we learned in a Mishnah over there, Ezehu neder, what is considered a neder? When somebody says ha'omer harei alai oila, somebody says I want to give a neder. What does it mean? He says I am donating a oila to the Beis Mikdash, to Hashem. That is considered a neder. Ezehu nidava. What is considered a nidava? Ha'omer harei zu oila. Somebody says, this carbon over here in front of me is going to be a carbon oila. This animal in front of me is going to be a carbon oila. That's the difference. So because he says that this animal, so if something happens to this animal unintentional, then he doesn't have to replace it. But if he says, I bring an oila on me, you pledge, you buy something, you pledge, and you say, this, I owe the Beis HaMikdash, let's say, $100. Right? So even though I was going to give this 100 and something happened to it, I still owe that 100 because I said I'm going to give 100. Uma bein nedarim l'nedavos, and what is the difference between nedarim and nedavos? Nedarim mesu inignavu avdu. Neder, if it died or it got stolen or it got lost, chayav achrusin. You are chayav to replace it. Nedavos mesu inignavu avdu, any chayav achrusin. By nedava, if it dies or it gets stolen or it gets lost, you're not chayav to replace it. Minohani mili. From where do we know this? The Tanna Rabbanan, we learned in the Brisa. V'nirtza loy l'chaper alav. V'nirtza, and it will be merutza. It will be like the
fulfilled.
Fulfilled. That's what the article. What's the article types for v'nirtza? Satisfied.
Meaning to say fulfilled his carbon, his pledge, his whatever.
The v'nirtza loy l'chaper alav. You see what the
and it shall be accepted for him.
Accepted. Okay, that's a good word. V'nirtza loy, and it should be accepted for him l'chaper alav, to be mechaber, to forgive. Rabbi Shimon Omer es she'alav chayav v'chuyusay. Rabbi Shimon says es she'alav, that which is on him when he says I am bringing an oilam, so he's chayav to replace it. Es she'einu lav ein chayav v'chuyusay. But if he doesn't say on me, he just says I'm bringing this animal. If something happens to this animal, then he's not chayav. My mashma. So what's mashma? This only reason why even the Omar alai came on the ton askafri dom. Since he says on me, so he already took it upon himself that he has to
personally guarantee.
Guaranteed, right? That was the word I was looking for. Good. Okay, so this is where we finish.
He says the burden of responsibility.
The burden of responsibility is on him because he says it's on me. Right? The person says it's on me. Okay, so we're going weiter in Shas Ein Bein. So Ches Amar Aleph, the Mishnah of Ein Bein Zov. So basically, what's the tumah of Zov? Zov is a man that has an emission, I think is the Art School word. He has an emission from his erva, like from his makom bris over there, and he has an emission come out. So the first time that he sees it, the second time to the third time, the second time to the third time is a difference. So if you have two emissions, two sayings of emission, or if you had three, it becomes a different in Tumah. Zok the Mishnah, the only difference between having two riyas to three riyas is that by three you would have to bring a carbon. Now the Tumah of Zav is different because you need a Mayim Chaim, not the seltzer. You need a spring. You need spring water. You can't go to regular mikvah for Zav. Zav needs specifically a Mayim Chaim. Just a note so we understand a little bit. Zog the Gemara, Hala Inyan Mishkav Ma'ishav, but Inyan of Mishkav Ma'ishav Usviras Sheva Zev Zeh Shavim. So somebody who's Tamei was Zav from 2 days if he sits, he becomes a sheni, and I think on the third day he becomes an avatoma. So basically, on the second day of seeing two sightings or two emissions, so Mishkav, if he sits or lies, he sits on a couch or on a bed. So even if he sits on a stack of pillows, so the bottom pillow, it's all connected, so it becomes tameh. So so he would still make tameh anything he sits on or lies on, and he still has to count 7. Now, 7 is similar to like by a woman nida, she has to count 7 clean days. So the same thing by a zav. A zav, after he sees 1, he doesn't have to count 7, but once he sees 2 already, now there could be 2 in one day, or it could be 1 today and 1 tomorrow. 2 over 2 days is still 2 in a row. So he would have to count Zayin Akiyim, and if through, let's say on day 3 he has again an emission, then he would have to again start the 7. I'm just trying to give a little, basic background on Zav. So Sfira Shiva, Zav Zav Shavim. Minoha Nimili, from where do we know this? The Tan Rabbanan, we learned in the Brayso, Rabbi Simoi Oimer. Mona HaKosav Shtayim V'karu Tameh. The Pasuk pointed out that after 2 re'iyas, 2 sightings, 2 emissions, he becomes Tameh. Shalish V'karu Tameh. And then again, by 3, also the Pasuk, if you look at the Pasuk, it says V'tameh, and it becomes Tameh. Okay, tzad. So how does this work? Shtayim l'tuma v'shalosh l'karban. Right. So on the second day he becomes actually tamei. From the second seeing, he becomes tamei. V'shalosh l'karban. For the third day he's also tamei, but also has to bring a carbon. So frankly, more v'ema shtayim l'tuma v'loy l'karban. So maybe 2, the difference is that 2, he becomes tamei but not a carbon. Shalish l'karban v'loy l'tuma. And at 3, he has to bring a carbon, but he's not tamei. So amrit ashloi ro shalish ro shtayim. So how can he say that? Because until he saw 3, he also saw 2. So how could he become untamei? Ve'ema shtayim l'karban v'loy l'tuma. Shalish aflatuma loy sakadai aflatuma loy sakadai. Why? That doesn't make sense. The Tanya, the chiper olav hakoyen lefnei Hashem, and the koyen.
There's a pasuk that says.
Well, that's the pasuk. Yeah. The chiper olav hakoyen lefnei Hashem mi zoivai, right? And the koyen helps him be mechaper lefnei Hashem. From his zoiv, from his tumah of zav. So mi zoivai, from his zav, is mashma that's not the whole thing, but it's part of it. Mixas zavin mevi'in carbon, or mixas zavin in mevi'in carbon. So some people that have the zav are required to bring a carbon, and some are not required to bring a carbon. Okay, tzad. How does this work? Rosh shalosh maybe. Shtayim einoi mevi. So if he saw 3, he had 3 instances of seeing the emission, then he would bring a carbon. Shtayim, if he only had 2, he wouldn't bring a carbon. Oy einoi, frankly more, maybe not ela ra 2, maybe ra shalish einoi mevi. Right? Or maybe 2 he would have to, and 3 he wouldn't have to. So the Gemara says the same thing. Until he saw 3, the same thing. Until he saw 3, he had to have seen 2. And mathematically, I'm not the best with mathematics, but usually to see 3, you would have had to first seen 2. And once you've seen 2, it only gets more chomer, not more. I think we'll stop here for that, and we'll do chazar from